That's good coffee. Hey everyone, this is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com and of course Gartman Technical Services at GartmanTechnical.com. And man, I got some good coffee here. So this is going to be another In My Opinion video for you guys, where you guys get to ask me any kind of questions that you want. So please, please, please drop me your questions in the comment section below this video. All you have to do is just get that keyboard out. I'm sure it's probably right in front of you right now. Just go down to the comment section, go say, Steve, I really don't like your haircut. Who is your barber so I can avoid them? Okay, ask me your questions. Send me your questions. Okay, I need them for this video series. So just keep, type away. Okay, enough of that. Today's question is coming from Alan Monteith. And Alan says, Steve, I'm an older access developer who developed software for my nephew's business. It has been in use until last year as a local sort of client-server application in his main office. Last year, in an effort to gain a widely distributed application with a central DB, we moved to hosting our access apps on Azure Remote App. This works absolutely fantastic for us, and we have two different applications provided by this technology. Now ARA is going away, and as you say, Access is likely eventually going away in its current form. How can we develop a plan to move to both an application environment, ergo Access, and a distributed architecture, ergo Citrix or web applications, that we can have confidence will carry the business into the future, the next 10 years? Signed, Alan. Well, Alan, first of all, thank you very much for your question. And second of all, this is really good coffee. My goodness. Anyway, yeah, Alan, this is kind of a problem that we always face in technology whenever we're doing any sort of development, is what am I, in this technology that I'm doing the development in, what's it going to look like in 10 years? Is this technology that I'm doing the development in even going to be around in 10 years? And especially in today's world with the open source world, this is an even bigger problem, right? Because we've got people that are creating these libraries and these technologies that just, they're here, we start to build on them, and then a year later, whoever the major contributor is gets a job somewhere, or the product gets bought out by some other company and then, completely deprecated. So this type of open source community causes even more of that strain on us as developers trying to figure out what is the technology I should do the development in. But the flip side to that is, because there's always these new technologies, the companies that we build them for constantly have to ask us to upgrade their systems, upgrade their software. So it provides us work all the time. So with that in mind, Alan, to start digging into your question a bit more, Azure Remote App is a great technology. I'm really kind of surprised that they're dropping it, because I know a lot of companies use stuff like that, and like Citrix, because it makes for a very simple solution, very powerful solution that allows for for you to distribute your applications, like you said, basically across the entire architecture of your business. So I'm kind of surprised they're going away with it. I would imagine they probably have some other technology that's emerging that they're planning on, pushing out as a replacement to it. I don't know what that is. And for those of you who don't know what Azure Remote App is, it's kind of like a terminal server for just applications that's hosted on the cloud. So if you want to open up an application, it essentially opens it up in like a virtual environment. So you can run your application in that virtual environment that's hosted on that server. It's a really good technology, and like I said, I'm kind of surprised they're going away with it. Those of you who know Citrix are probably familiar with something like this too. So, yeah, so how do you plan for the future? And that's tough, because you're asking me to kind of prognosticate and predict what's going to happen in the future. And I'd like to consider myself, pretty aware. I observe a lot of what's going on, and I try to prognosticate out there into the future and figure out what's going to happen. But I'm not going to be 100% perfect on this. So even my advice, you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. But here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to have to give you the medicine. It's painful medicine, but I'm going to have to do it. I think you need to get out of Access first. Even though I love Access, I just spent my last In My Opinion video basically defending Access and the abilities that it has. But I do think that well, we know there are limitations to access, and you're kind of bumping into it. You need some other technology to help you out, right? And if that other technology goes away, like Azure Remote App, you're left holding the bag. What do I do with this Access application? So because of that, really Access is good for enterprise environments under specific conditions for particular reasons. And as you say, I think Access in its current form is going to have to go away. I think that Microsoft has to do something because Access is based on COM, and COM objects are not the future. They're not. It's kind of a boat anchor, right? It's dragging Access down, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen any new technologies emerging with Access, right? If you think about the history, the history of Access. Like Access 97 was huge, right? It was a big blockbuster application. A lot of people started, using it. Started to become very popular in office spaces. And then 2003 was a really great version of Access. I know a ton of applications that are still using Access 2003. And then 2007 was a completely blew everybody out of the water. People hated it mostly because of the ribbons. But then by around Access 2010, people were more comfortable with it. And honestly, Access 2010 is probably my favorite version. I love Access 2010. But we haven't really seen anything new in 2013 or 2016. And really, that stems from because in 2007, they started adding some compatibility with 64-bit, but it's never really going to happen, right? Because it's COM, and COM is 32-bit. So we kind of have this boat anchor when the hardware is moving into 64-bit, and who knows where it's going to go in the future, and we're still stuck in the 32-bit world, and no new technologies are coming out for COM, right? It's not where technology is going, so how can there be anything new for Access if there's nothing new for COM? And that is why Access must be changed. Something needs to happen. And right now, Microsoft is bilking Access for everything they can until COM is essentially completely gone. They're kind of still holding on to what they can do with it. That being said, I believe that Access is going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to have to do as I've suggested, and they've actually made an attempt to do this really early on, where Access was essentially built on .NET. Right? All of the objects that are COM objects now go instead to .NET objects. I think that's what they really should do, because then it becomes much easier for you to make the transition. If I take this Access application that's essentially built on top of .NET, I can then hand that off to a developer who does know .NET, and they can take what I've been building as a power user, and they can get more in depth with stuff. They can start doing some of the more asynchronous type of things. They can build it out to work with other, other technologies, maybe even move it over to the web, doing some some ASP.NET stuff, whatever it is that they want to do with it at that point. But at least you started out with a .NET infrastructure that you can port over to other .NET technologies, whereas you can't really do that right now as a COM system. So either they do that, or they're going to have to just replace it. They're going to have to replace Access with something else, which I think is the more likely scenario, because it's always easier for a company to market something new and get people to cling on to it than to say, oh, here's this old technology, we've re-renovated it. You're not going to get as much buy-in from that, I think. Even though you kind of have a built-in user base, companies always like to announce that they have a new technology coming out. That's what drives their business. Is we have a new technology. Here it is. It's wonderful. It does all these things. But eventually, or essentially, what I'd like that new technology to be is essentially like Access, right? It's some sort of technology that's like Access, but just will be built, like I said, hopefully on the .NET infrastructure. And if they do that, and actually, they've actually tried to make they tried to do Light Switch, which was very much like that. It was a completely different way to build your interfaces, but you could do it for desktops or web applications. And you didn't have to be a full .NET developer. You could just kind of be a power user with a little bit of knowledge. You could build this application, and it didn't look like Access, had like these almost pre-designed forms and stuff, but it was a simple way to build an interface that was both web and desktop that essentially merged all the same technologies that Access kind of does. So that was their attempt to do something, I think, as a replacement to Access, but it just fizzled out. Light Switch, I think, was around, and I know I started tinkering around with it in Visual Studio 2012, and it was released again in 2013, but I think I didn't see it in Visual Studio 2015, and I think it went away because Silverlight went away, which was the technology that it was kind of basically being built on. So they've done this before, right? They've tried both ways. They've tried both to have a .NET backend for Access, and they've tried to build some other technology like Access to try to replace it, and it failed also, which is kind of good news and bad news. The good news is it means Access is not really going anywhere. It's still kind of stuck because we've got all these different companies that use it. They all use Access, right? We've got so many different companies that are management position people that are these power users making the decisions about what are the technologies they're going to buy, and those are the very people that are using Access. So Microsoft has to keep releasing Access with Office, but at some point, like I said, that thread of being on COM is going to eventually snap. There's going to have to be some sort of change, and they're probably going to have to, it's going to be seismic, right? It's going to be a huge change for a lot of people. And that just means that there's going to be a lot of problems. A lot of people are going to hate it. A lot of people are going to love it. And it's going to become, Microsoft's kind of going to have some problems on their hands when they try to do this, but the sooner that they do, the better. Now, going back to your particular situation, what should you do? And I said, I would suggest getting out of Access. I highly recommend you do get out of Access. If you're looking for something that is going to be the next 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, I'd say the technologies right now that are probably the most firm to do exactly what you're trying to do, being a distributed architecture and be something that you can be confident in, I would say look to the big players, right? The big names in this space. Google, Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, all these big names that are out there, they all kind of have their flavors of things that they're pursuing. To me, the most hardened system that's out there right now is probably going to be, if you do like C# with Angular. And the reason why I say that is because Angular is both being pursued by Microsoft and Google, right? They're both developing Angular. And Angular 4 just got released. I've seen some really nifty features with Angular 4. And from a VBA's perspective, right, a VBA developer's perspective, I understand this is a huge, huge hill, right? This is a mountain to climb. Because you're probably, if you're like 95, 99% of Access developers, you probably do almost all of your development in a procedural way. Because that's kind of how VBA is built. It's not, even though there are classes in it, it's not built to be an object-oriented language. You have to be very diligent in order to make it an object-oriented language, and it just doesn't lend itself to be that way. So you're going to have to learn one of these object-oriented languages like C# or PHP or Ruby or Python or something like that. You're going to have to learn one of those languages, and that's one task. And then on top of that, you have to learn JavaScript with potentially, if you're going to do Angular, that means you've got to learn, like, I would suggest learning TypeScript, because TypeScript is very tightly coupled with Angular. And Angular has its own way of doing modules and way that it sets up its JavaScript. This is a completely different architecture too that you have to learn. So you've got a pretty monumental task in front of you. And if you say, like you said, and you're an older Access developer, this is going to be harder for you than probably it was for me to make this transition, because you've been doing it this way for a long time, and you've got to completely change the way your brain thinks about these problems, about how to solve situations. It's taken me many years to really get comfortable with C# as the language that I chose, and to move into those other technologies like JavaScript and Angular. But that's the hill you have to climb. I think you really have to climb it. And I'm not saying this just because it's me and that's what I did. Even if you choose some other technology, if you go with like Python for your back end, or you pick like Node.js for your back end, do that. That's fine. I wouldn't say that that's a problem. I just think that C# is really good language to move into because it's not going to go anywhere. It's backed by Microsoft. It is the premier language of Microsoft, right? It's what almost every code example you're ever going to find is done in. I know you're going to be tempted. I know you're probably very tempted, as I was tempted, to go from VBA to VB.NET. And I learned VB.NET because I thought that was the right way to go. But I kind of wish that I hadn't done that because it was a waste of my time. It would have just have been better if I jumped right into doing C#. Because again, I have all of these code examples of how to do things in C#. It's the language that gets everything first. VB.NET is not even supported just yet for ASP.NET Core. I don't know if this is kind of an iffy subject because I keep seeing things like, oh, it's supported by VB.NET, yet I can't do any development in it. So I think that there's some issues there. I don't think that it's completely supported yet. I wish it was, because I know a lot of VB developers that would like to start doing Core. But the bottom line is, try to avoid VB.NET. I would say that is probably not the direction you want to go. If you do C#, what you're going to learn is how to do a completely different language. Okay, you're going to teach yourself how to do a completely different language than VBA. And that is important to do. Being able to make that jump into some other language is going to help you because you're eventually going to have to jump again. You're going to have to go learn JavaScript or Python or WebAssembly or something like that. You are going to have to make a leap again into some other language. It's just the way the technology is going. And you've been able to resist this jump. You've been able to resist it for a very long time because Access has been a very stable product. It has been something that we've gotten used to. We haven't really seen it, need to go anywhere. It's always been there. There've been some changes inside of it that we love or hate, but it's always been there and we can make adjustments. I don't know how much longer Access is going to be here, so that means you have to learn something else. You have to. I would suggest, like I said, C#, because you're going to learn, first of all, you're going to be learning some other language, which is important to be able to do. You've got to learn that other language. Once you learn that other language, what's also great about C# is that you have a lot of different programming styles that can come into play with C#. You can do strictly object-oriented programming, but you can also do functional style. And if you learn the functional style, that starts getting you into a much easier transition into JavaScript, okay? Because once you learn C# with functional style programming, with lambdas and delegates and that sort of thing, and being more event-driven and that kind of thought process, it becomes very easy to move into JavaScript. Once you know JavaScript, then you just have to learn TypeScript, which is essentially like it's what we call a transpiled language. You take TypeScript and it essentially gives you type safety in JavaScript, which kind of makes it feel like JavaScript in C#. Okay, that's probably the best way I can explain it. Is it kind of feels like C# but in JavaScript, with a little bit of different syntax. Understand there is a syntactical difference there, but you'll understand the concepts because you've done them so much in C# with both functional and object-oriented programming styles that TypeScript in JavaScript will seem like second nature. It'll be very comfortable to you, and then from there moving into Angular. Which is where I would definitely recommend. That's the framework I think is probably the best one to pursue for your front end. That would be the direction I would suggest, and it's not that difficult. Once you know TypeScript and JavaScript, it becomes very easy to do Angular. So that's the direction I'm going to recommend. That's kind of the direction I'm going with my career and what I do with the different technologies I do for my clients. So that's kind of what I'm going to say, and I've done that because that's my wisdom. That's what I wanted to do because I was looking at the technology and seeing, okay, my company, the company that I work for, has been doing Access for a very long time. I think it's going away. What is the technology that we should be doing? .NET, C#, JavaScript, Angular. That was the direction that I said we need to start taking this company, and that's the direction we're going. And our clients should be happy with that, and they have been. But it has been a huge learning curve. It has been an absolutely huge learning curve. So I think that probably. Oh, one other thing I want to talk about: distributed architecture. This is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about here for you here, Alan. Distributed architecture is. I'm going to suggest that you really start to understand how you develop applications in one of these object-oriented languages is very important. And one of the distributed architectural plans that you have out there, they talk about it as SOA. I prefer the certain subsect of SOA called microservices. If you can do microservices, especially for an enterprisey type of scenario, it's worth doing, in my opinion, because it makes it easy to replace parts. Okay, and essentially what this means is that instead of having what they call a monolithic application, one application that does everything, you split it up into separate little tiny services that you distribute those services across your architecture of your hardware. Okay, so you have multiple different servers hosting these little services, and then you interconnect them, you interweave them into an application, and it makes it easy for you to pluck out one of those services and replace it with a new one, right? You can while this one is running, while this little service is doing its thing, you can go work on a completely different environment to work on its replacement, and then once it's ready, you just spin it up and replace it. Okay, and that's the important thing to be able to do. You need to be able to upgrade and replace your components. And that's part of why we want, it's a bit of a bigger concept than just distribution of your architecture, right? It's more than just having your database hosted in the cloud or having your application hosted in the cloud. This is about being able to have your resources be appropriated according to the needs of those resources, as well as having the interchangeability, right? The ability to remove and replace different components within your application. So if that is the direction you really want to start going with your development, for this small little application that it sounds like you have, it's kind of tough, really. It's kind of tough to say that that's probably the big picture of where you want to go. I'm kind of giving that advice not just specifically to you, but to everyone, that is something you should start investigating, is microservices. And these could be things like web APIs that just expose some sort of endpoint, and you have multiple web APIs that expose multiple different endpoints. That is typically the scenario you want to go if you're going to have like large scale enterprisey systems where you're talking about, multiple different developers and different people that are working on the project in different capacities. You really want to start thinking about this microservices. But for you specifically, Alan, with your kind of small scenario, you probably don't have too many people that are working on this. It sounds like you might even be doing the development yourself. I'm going to tell you that probably the fast track that you should take for this is you could try to go learn it yourself, right? Learn all these technologies, go through that huge learning curve, and you would probably feel good about yourself doing it. Because I know as a developer, I love learning new things. I imagine you probably do too. But probably the best idea to shortcut this is to hire someone else. Just find someone. It doesn't have to be me. It could be me, but it doesn't have to be me. Find someone that knows this technology, can do it for you, and start doing the development. And if you can, like what I like to do is I have clients sometimes that say, hey, I want to learn this technology too. So we actually do the development process together. If you can find that kind of scenario, a developer that's willing to do the work with you, that would be great. But at least I would say probably the quickest route to get you from point A to point B is to just spend the money, find someone, hire them to do this stuff, okay? I don't think that you're going to find it very easy to make that learning curve. It took me years to get this far, so I don't think that you're probably going to be anticipating that to be a very... you probably don't like the prospect of that idea of having to learn all these technologies, and I'm sorry to say that. So, like I said, the best route I think for you would just be hire someone that can do it, especially if your company is growing and they really need to make this move and the technology that is currently being supported is going away. You're just going to have to bite the bullet and do it. But once you do, once you make the leap, if you do go into this, this type of network or this type of setup for your back end, then you're going to be much better prepared for the changes that are going to happen in the future. Okay? So I hope that answered your question, Alan. I really appreciate the fact that you sent it in to me. And so thank you so much for your question, and thank you everyone else for watching. I hope you guys had a wonderful time. And until I see you guys at the next video, bye-bye. If you would be interested in early access to our videos, live monthly Q&As, your name in the credits, or one-on-one sessions, please visit us on Patreon at patreon.com/programmingmadeeasy.